Welcome back to the Changemaker Podcast. I'm your host, Deke Copenhaver. Today, my guest is my good friend, Tara Simkins. Tara is a lawyer turned life coach, facilitator, and childhood cancer philanthropist. Tara left a successful 20-year legal career to pursue a new calling, that of teacher, writer, life coach, and co-founder of thepressonfund.org. Inspired by her middle son's groundbreaking leukemia journey, Tara shares a unique understanding of what it means to potentially lose something very meaningful in your life, and in the face of such loss, to commit to living an extraordinary life, which she has. She's a graduate of Wake Forest University, the University of Georgia Law School, and the Life Coach School as a certified life coach. Tara lives in North Augusta, South Carolina, with her husband Turner, her three sons Nat, Brendan, and Christopher, and their dog Lucky. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you one of the coolest ladies in the southeastern United States, Tara Simkins.
Welcome to the Changemaker Podcast, hosted by Deke Copenhaver. Deke is the author of The Changemaker, a Forbes publishing book that has reached #1 on Amazon on multiple occasions and in multiple categories like management skills and total quality management. During this podcast, Deke interviews exceptional change-making leaders. Deke currently operates Copenhaver Consulting, where he helps local governments and other public organizations maximize their potential. He's also a sought-after public speaker. We hope that the Changemaker has an impact on you today and that you find takeaways that make you a better leader in your life. Now, here's Deke.
Welcome, Tara.
Hey, Deke. Wow.
Well, it's true, though.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you being here today because you are an amazing and inspiring lady. But I've been thinking about it, doing research over the past couple of days. So tell a little bit about the first part of your career, because you had a successful 20-year career in the field of law and were, one of the most respected lady lawyers and lawyers in our community, I know.
Well, thank you. I graduated from the University of Georgia Law School in 1992, and I went to work in Atlanta at a pretty big law firm, and I did catastrophic injury litigation. I think that what I didn't know then was the seeds that was planting in my life to become a life coach later on. So I defended major corporations that people had been injured either using their products or in accidents. And there was one case in particular that I was working as the younger lawyer on the team. And it was such a sad case. It was a mother of two small children. She was driving on a rainy day on a small country road in Madison, Georgia. And an 18-wheeler was coming around the corner and put its brakes on and jackknifed. And she ran into the back of that 18-wheeler and she died. And she left her husband and these two small children. They sued the manufacturer of the 18-wheeler, and they alleged a design defect. Mm-hmm. We felt we really believed in our client's product. Our client believed in their product, that they hadn't done anything wrong. And so the litigation spanned over 5 years. We went up to the U.S. Supreme Court on a federal preemption issue. We came back. We finally tried the case 5 years after she has died, and her husband is on the stand. And it was a bench trial, which means there wasn't a jury, and it was in federal court. And the judge returned a verdict in favor of the widower. Uh-huh. And it was a $2 million verdict, which back in 1994, that was a huge verdict. And I was sitting, first of all, of course, we were devastated that we had lost the case. We were also devastated this woman had lost her life, but we just didn't think our client's product had done any, had a defect. But when I saw her husband, when the verdict was returned, after he'd given his testimony on the stand, it was obviously very emotional. But when the verdict was returned, there was something that came over him that was like it was over, but there was still such rawness, right? And I remember thinking, wow, he anticipated, he's been waiting for this moment for 5 years. His wife has died, right? He's been waiting for some closure to this, for something to say this was wrong, this happened, this is why she died. And when it came, best case scenario, it was just, there was an emptiness to it for him. And I think at that point, the seed was planted in me that the law can make people whole. It's designed to make people whole, but only to the extent of what it can do, right? So in this case, some type of financial compensation for a life.
Yeah.
And I realized how much space remains uncompensated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do you value a life? Fast forward, so that was my first 20 years. I practiced law in that environment. We moved home. My husband and I came back to Augusta. I still did civil defense work, but then I moved into corporate work for a major media outlet, and I loved doing that work. We had 3 boys, and my middle son, as you know, was diagnosed with leukemia in 2009. And at that point, I had a different perspective on things, and I went through that time, and we'll talk about it later. But through that, I leaned into life coaching as a client, and really relied on it to lead my family through a crisis, coming to our intersection of our subject matter. And when I got through it on the other end, I was like, oh, this is that thing way back when that I could help people with. This is that gap that people need help bridging. And life coaching allows me to do that.
Well, I want to ask you this because I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Because I'm curious about everything, naturally. But my grandfather was a judge. I have 2 brothers that were lawyers. One is deceased. But I thought about being a lawyer when I was growing up. But then I thought, what if I was in a situation where I was defending somebody that I was not, they had hired me as their counsel, but I was not completely sure of their innocence in any situation. I'm like, how would I compartmentalize that?
Mm-hmm. So they teach you this in law school.
Oh, good. Well, I should have gone to law school.
And you're going to I think you're going to really love the framework that they teach you because you are an American and you've served in leadership capacities in the government, but it's about the Constitution.
Yeah.
And we are a country of laws that believes that people are innocent until they are proven guilty. And we believe in due process, which means everyone has the right to representation. So in those cases, what you do to compartmentalize is you are helping someone, you're standing in that void for that person who we believe, as a founding principle of our country, is worthy of representation.
Yeah.
Even if they've done something wrong. And that's such a relevant conversation right now.
Oh, yeah. Well, I want to get and we're going places which I thought we would. I didn't know that we'd go. But one of the things that I noticed in office, and I notice in society as a whole today, particularly through social media and media in general, it almost seems like now the burden of proof is on the accused and not the accuser, which is a very scary situation to me from a societal perspective to be in when people are tried in the court of public opinion before they ever get into a courtroom.
They are. That is a matter of, I think, marketing and media, which I know this is one of your touchstone subject matters, that mainstream media, that we have to remember, I think, as citizens, that we are also consumers.
Yes.
And that we're marketed to in a lot of the mainstream media as consumers. So we are pandered to our opinions, and that, produces sales for advertisers.
Well, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday, and then we'll get into this. I said, I say a number of things, my point of view about the mainstream media. But I said, mainstream implies that you're in the middle of the stream. And I don't think our major media outlets are basically anywhere near the middle of the stream these days.
Well, that goes back to, again, touches on the law from the standpoint of legislation. And there used to be laws in place that required that mainstream media to give equal weight to both sides. And that shifted somewhere around, between Nixon and Bush and those presidencies. There was a long shift. And then when those laws were changed, it allowed for what we see today, what we are experiencing today. So,
well, I appreciate your perspective on that because you're a very intelligent lady, and I appreciate your perspective on everything. But let's get back to your story.
Yay!
So you'd been in the practice of law for 20 years, and as you made mention of in 2009. Brennan, shortly after his 7th birthday, I believe.
On his 7th birthday.
Is diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, if I'm pronouncing that
That's
correctly.
right.
I'm sure you've heard that term more than you ever want to know. But one thing that I want to touch on this because I was thinking about it with you guys, with you and Turner and your family, in the context of leadership. So things did not go particularly well. And you can tell the whole story, but just tell for our listeners how it went down and the point that you got to that was maybe the point of sort of despair and either take a leap of faith or, turn the boat around and just throw your hands up and give up.
Yeah. So you think that the worst thing that could happen to you is to receive the news that your child has cancer. And when I say the worst thing that can happen to you, I know everybody, there's a menu of worse things that can happen to you, as you know, and as you've experienced in life. But we always think it's that one thing. And in our case, when we were told that on Brennan's 7th birthday that he had leukemia, we thought that was the worst thing. And then we were given a path forward from the doctors, and we thought, okay, we're going to buckle down for the next 6 to 9 months, and we're going to do this. And you rally yourself to, you kind of rise to the occasion. We can do this. And during that time, this is an interesting leadership aside. What you realize is you're not only dealing with that diagnosis and the treatment, but you have this whole community of people behind you that need a leader. And you also have an option to step into that void of harnessing that energy and leading those people as while you're doing this other thing. I'm going to put that aside for now, but to continue on the process, we got to that end of that 9 months and thinking that we were getting ready to be able to return to our lives, and we heard worse news than we had heard before, which was your child has relapsed. There are no curative options. Go to Disney World, call hospice. And he's 7. His big brother's 9. His little brother's 6. We were devastated. We'd been just pressing on for this time, just knowing we were going to hit that mark. And at that time, we had a dear friend, our co-founders in the Press On Fund, whose son had been in the pediatric cancer world for 3 year. And the interesting thing was we were in the room with the doctors. This is a top 10 cancer institute, and this is not diminishing that institute at all. I want to be very clear about that. But when we said there has to be an option, there has to be a name or a phone number, and the doctor said, no, I know of no one in the country that it's physically impossible for the human body to withstand the toxicity of the treatment without having a year to recover from what he's already been treated from. Like, there's just nothing out there. And they came in and they said, let's talk to you about telling your children that your son's going to die. And we were in shock. This friend of ours, Stephen Chance, our co-founder, we called him. They were at Philadelphia. They were in another children's hospital with their son at the time. And he just said, screw that. screw that. We're going to find something. We're going to put our feelers out. And we decided to do just that. We took the opinion of that institution. We valued that opinion. We knew that they were giving us the best opinion. But then we were like, what don't they know? Is there something out there that they don't know? And could we find it? I think we believed in our capacity to unearth something if it was out there, and to at least give it a try. You know, we weren't so naive to think we'll find something that he can't. We just didn't. In order to move forward for ourselves, we knew that we had to look further. And if we got the same answer that he did, so be it. But we needed to do something more.
Well, and that to me is, and I talk on the show so often, that's leadership, is to be willing to take a leap of faith.
Yes.
And taking a leap of faith is scary. And I'm sure doing something that they told you could not be done, literally there. And that's the thing that I always like to share with listeners, that part of leadership is not about being devoid of fear. It's having to face your fears.
It is. And in that case, I think, and this is a great coaching question for people, that, you know, if you're, imagine you know, there's something that you're afraid of doing right now. Ask yourself, what is the worst case scenario here? And I love that question. I remind my clients of that question all the time. What is the worst case scenario? If I apply that to the facts of our situation for illustrative purposes, then I could say, would the worst case scenario be that we followed the instructions and he died? Or would the worst case scenario be there was something out there he didn't know that we had the capacity to discover, and he died? So that helps you take that leap of faith, right? You actually step up to that fear. You ask it to, like, please tell me, like it's a conversation you're having, instead of being triggered by fight, flight, or freeze, right? Running away from it or fighting it or just freezing in the situation. You engage that fear, you use that emotion in a way that, okay, let me explore here. What's really going on here? What am I really afraid of? And by listening to that fear, you elevate your capacity to think higher than that level of fear. And it allows you to begin to calm the fear down, right? I'm listening. Like, you're kind of leaning into the fear, right? Like, okay, I'm listening. You're a good advisor to me. Yeah. You're a good advisor to me. So tell me what it is you think the worst case scenario is. And then that moves us into a place where we've regulated our nervous system and we can start to engage a conversation. And then we're like, oh, in this case, the worst case scenario is actually something different.
So you were not a certified life coach at that point, or were you?
I was not.
So did some of this come innately to you, or are you going back? I mean, I'm sure it had to.
Well, I told you that my father was a lawyer.
Yeah.
So I was raised by the best tutor in the world. Lawyers engage in the Socratic method, which is just like asking questions, right? It's just what I'm saying with the fear. Let's ask the question. So I grew up at my dinner table from the age that, you know, you can begin to start to reason, with a kind and compassionate father who challenged me to question my opinions, to question my positions, and to look at another side, right? And then at the other end of the table was this amazingly kind mother that was like encouraging you that you can do this, you can stand up to this questioning. And so then you go to law school, and I do think law is such a valuable education because it does teach you how to think.
Yeah.
To think, what are all the possibilities here, right? What are all the arguments? And it also teaches you, as you brought out before, sometimes I'm going to have to argue and stand up for a position that I may not believe this guy is innocent, but what am I standing for in the process? So I think all of that had led me to the point. And then I will have to layer in, for me, this is deeply spiritual work. And so there's this component of like there being a contemplative prayer component to it, right? Like when I'm asking those questions, there's also that space of there's this prayer going out.
Yep.
And that helps you face your fear as well.
It's interesting to me though, something that you said that I think is so important with regards to leadership. So when you were initially told, take Brennan to Disney World, call in hospice, you didn't place any moral judgments on that, what they told you.
That's right.
You felt like they were giving you the best information that they could. And I think that sort of holds us back sometimes in situations where people, and it's almost like society teaches you to make moral judgments. But I think that in leadership roles, as best you can listen thoroughly, not make moral judgments and say, okay, well, we'll take that and we'll consider it, but let's look at a different side. And that's what you mentioned about the law. That's what I love. But reason and logic have always been what were instilled in me and my family, and not making decisions based on raw emotion, because I think that always gets you in trouble.
Yeah, I think, the interesting thing when we were growing up, there's this misunderstanding of what emotions are, right? And I think that one of the great things about the science and that I take into my coaching, which is so available right now, is the difference between a fight, flight, or freeze emotion, which I think is a raw emotion.
Yeah.
And it's our oldest evolutionary part of our brain that triggers those old evolutionary emotions.
In the amygdala?
In the amygdala.
Yes.
That's right.
I'm learning.
And so, but as we began to evolve, and this is kind of interesting, but because we're mammals, we have our children before they can take care of themselves, right? And there becomes a point in human evolution where this is not a male-female thing. I'm going to use this term as an energetic type of term, but mothering.
Yeah.
Right? Which really is this compassion, this turning in to take care of something. So those are emotions too, but they are a higher level of emotion. So I do want to invite people to think about, we do make decisions oftentimes on raw emotion that we don't realize it, right? Especially if we're trying to hold an emotion at bay. We're fighting against it, and that can exhaust people. So in that situation, going back to that doctor, my husband's instinct was just to be so angry.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how could we find something that they couldn't find? And really, there's a tendency we want to be insulted by that or disappointed in that. Those are all emotions too, right?
Absolutely.
And then, but if we can move to this life philosophy, which I think is part of what you just pulled out, it's a leadership philosophy of living. If I can say, okay, everybody is doing the best they can do in this situation. That leads me to a sense of understanding and compassion, which is that higher level of emotions, right? So it's kind of interesting.
Well, so I know our listeners that don't know you are probably like, okay, well, we want to know, what's going on with Brennan from this point forward. So please, I'm sure everybody's sitting on the edge of their seats. So,
drum roll and a great tee up for this. So Brennan relapsed 3 times and ended up having 4 bone marrow transplants in 18 months. Now, going back to that doctor that said the human body needed 12 months to recover before a second. So the journey continued. And then he survived 4 bone marrow transplants. And then we have this really fragile child that we had to kind of like what everybody's experienced during the pandemic, right? We had to isolate for another 3 to 4 years from people. So he was diagnosed on his 7th birthday. He's 19 now. and he is a freshman in college at the University of Memphis.
Yes, naturally.
And for those, I don't think I finished the story. We did find options, obviously. He ended up at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, and the fact that he has now returned to Memphis as a college student is a pretty remarkable thing.
He is such, I mean, and I love all your boys. I love Nat and Christopher too, and Brennan, but Brennan is such an old soul, and you hear that constantly. But what a leader, a young leader, and every one of those boys is in their own right. I know you guys are extremely proud.
I am really proud of all of them. I am. And I want to say this to your listeners who are, who are parents or who have young people that they mentor, like you do a lot. That developing those young people to be leaders is so important, to give them, they could have felt victimized by their life circumstances. And this was a singular decision that I made, and Turner very kindly, my husband, repeats this story to people, that I decided that day that Brennan was diagnosed, I said, he is not going to be a victim of cancer. He is not going to be a victim of cancer. That was a very powerful decision. I didn't know how impactful that would be in our lives. And what I think that is a decision that for people who are leaders and people who want to take control and become a leader in their lives, that's a primary decision I think that you have to make, because life is what I like to call 50-50. There's the tough stuff and there's the great stuff.
Yep.
Everybody gets their mix of the 50-50. The next question is, what do you want to do with the 50-50 that you got, right? And how do you want to make it? And so I think that I didn't realize how we were leading our children in that decision to be able to have the confidence that they could do whatever they wanted. They could use that 50-50. And the thing I want to invite your listeners to think about now, because I hear this a lot, and I just heard it the other night at dinner, especially with young people. And it's so well intended, but this comment that the pandemic has stolen something from us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, it stole his graduation, or it stole her freshman year, or it stole this or stole that. Just really take a pause there to understand the impact. Yeah. The lifelong impact that has on a person. That if we can pause it and say, okay, let me think about this. Maybe it has, but what if it hasn't stolen anything from me? It gave me maybe a raw deal. Yeah. But what am I going to do with the circumstances now, right? What do I want to create moving forward?
And I try to look at the good in every situation, but I've said, and I think I've said it on the show, that I think the pandemic has the potential to create the next great generation. And your boys are the band of brothers. Those three young men, as a reference to, a World War II documentary, I believe, made by Tom Hanks. But that the greatest generation became that because they had to be.
That's right. And
I think this generation is so creative, and I applaud you for turning more of them to looking towards that. That it, what if the greatest generation would say, it stole, I had to go to Europe. My dad flew B-17 bombers in World War II. World War II stole this from me. But It's like, as opposed, they rose to the occasion.
They rose to the occasion. But they were supported in this. You were doing something great.
Exactly.
You were doing something beyond yourself. You were doing something that's more important. You were doing something that's worth laying your life down.
Yeah.
And you go back to that Band of Brothers quote, right? You were willing to lay your life down for your brother. And I just get chills thinking about it. I had not heard you say that. That is so exciting to me to think that this is the greatest generation. Now, what can we do to support these young people to know that they have it within them to meet this challenge and to create a better future for themselves than they would have had if the pandemic hadn't existed.
Exactly. And I'm excited, and I am a glass half full guy, but I want to shift to something else that I was thinking about. And I think part of leadership is dealing with loss.
Yes.
Because leading means connecting with people, and in order to connect with people, you have to open yourself up to them. And I've thought often about, how many friends' children y'all lost through the process, but I was thinking specifically about you. We had a mutual friend, Helen Tarbutton,
Yes,
who passed recently, tragically, 54 years old, an aneurysm. Beautiful, had gone through a difficult time, difficult divorce, but had found her way and was just so happy and vivacious. And I didn't realize until we saw you at her service that you had been her life coach.
yes.
And it struck me at that moment, I'm like, somebody that you've been so close to and you've seen, come from a bad situation to be in a really good one, and then have that personal connection as a friend and as a client. If that's not too much to ask, but I thought, Tara was so invested in her, and she got into this wonderful point in her life and then was gone too quickly.
I know. The thing about that, it was really hard, and it remains really hard, right? Because we think, oh, she was just catching her stride. But the thing that I look back on and applaud her for doing, she didn't have to reach out when she did to say, okay, I have a bad hand, right? I've been dealt a bad hand. I want to create something better with my life. And I have to go through and face all of the things and really reconcile myself.
Yeah.
It's a deep reconciliation process, a deep mediation process within ourselves of the life we thought we were going to have and the life that we actually have. But that being able to continue that conversation with life, I was so honored. I was so honored to be that witness, to be that person who stood in the gap, who said, you can do this. I believe you can do this. Let me share these tools with you. And she showed up. I mean, we worked together for 3 years on a weekly basis. She showed up. It didn't matter if she needed to go to a parents' weekend out of town somewhere or a vacation. We navigated very intentionally, like, what is the best I can do the first holiday after a divorce, right? What is the best I can do at this parents' weekend when I'm arguing with this person? What's the best I can do as a woman who hasn't been in charge of my finances for a long time? Like, right, there was so much, like, where do I see myself living? All of these things. She used that time in her life to face all of those decisions and to make them and to grieve the life that she thought that she was going to have and to heal the hurt in her heart. And she was so driven by those children, but she was also driven for herself, right? For herself. So she gave her entire family such a gift at that celebration, wasn't it? Just remarkable. The gift that, talk about a leader, talk about being able to lead, whether you were alive or whether you have gone on. Her dedication and commitment and belief and willingness to create something better is now imprinted in everyone's heart and mind.
Exactly.
She's given a model for so many people to follow.
And I've never been to a funeral service that large.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. And I, here again, trying to look for the silver lining, I'm like, nobody gets to choose when your time comes. But I thought the fact of being happy and being, at a good place in life, that's the silver lining. It doesn't ease it, the pain on her family, on her friends, on anybody. They are leaders in and of themselves. But the way that she handled her life, what an example to her children.
Yes. Yes. What a real example to her children.
But I think that is part of what, and I want you to talk about, press on and what you guys do with that,
Yeah.
because I think about that, and that to me is part of good leadership too, is to take a negative and turn it into a positive.
Right.
Helen did that. You guys have done that with Brennan's situation and Press On, and what an amazing organization, and what you've been able to do since that fund was established is really, I mean, it's inspirational. You took a very difficult situation and turned it into a great positive that benefits the lives of so many others.
We, well, first of all, I'll just thank you because you've been such a part of it from the beginning. You and Melissa have, and this, and people from all over the world have. It was, for us, it was an act of survival and an act of faith. Equally both, right? There was this sense of desperation that when you are in those challenging times, the inclination is to put those blinders on, and you just kind of dig deep. You go into that hole of the challenging times. What I knew we had to do, and I got help, and I was working with a coach and working in a program at the time. I'm like, I think this is a time we actually have to lift up. We actually have to go higher, to broaden our perspective, right? It was so easy just to be tunnel vision into all of those children who were sick and dying, and we're like, okay, but what is the fuller perspective? Going back to life is 50-50. I need to see the fullness of the perspective of life here. And then I think this came from, my, whether it's my legal background or, I was raised a Roman Catholic, and I was educated by nuns. And so there's a big social justice component to Catholicism that I don't know if a lot of people know about, but Dorothy Day, and especially in the United States, there's this big social justice. So that idea of, I think, whatever your faith tradition is, all of the faith traditions hold this same component to be true. This idea of, loving your neighbor as yourself, or doing what you can do. And so it was, again, we go back to these emotions of, I can either be in this hole and fighting cancer as like, cancer sucks, or I can say, this is the cards we've been dealt. Who do I want to be in this? And what can I do? Like, what are my particular skill sets? And I think this is a good question for leaders, right? Like, I am in this situation. I'm deep in it. But what are my skill set? What are my special traits and talents? What can I bring to bear on the circumstance that could help my child, but also help others?
Yep.
Now that lifts me out of that state of emotional despair and helplessness and hopelessness into a place of hope, into a place of participating in my life. Like now I'm like, okay, I'm now going to write part of the script. What can we do? Press On was a result of that, right? So what we decided, and for all of you who are still kindly listening to our conversation,
Lots of people.
We had a wide group of friends who wanted to help us and who loved us. And we started by saying, there are other kids on the floor that could you just send in a $5 gift card to help them, that we could share with them. And then when we were told there were no curative options, we were like, oh, well, what kids need is a cure. And so could we just start using the energy of the group to say, what kids really need is a cure. Our kid needs a cure. Would you want to join us in participating and raise money for a cure? And actually, again, back to that emotion, that believe forward for us, right? And creating a future that's better than the present situation.
Amen.
Yeah. So Press On and is now, we have raised over $5 million.
Wow.
$1 million of that is held as kind of that we're holding back, but $4 million that we have granted out. And what we do is people trust us because we were in the fight for so long that we know the research, the doctors and the medical researchers that are like, what's the tip of the spear? What could move this cure rate in leukemia, brain tumors, and neuroblastoma? And then we direct our donors' money, and then we converse with other people who also are interested in those same goals, and we partner.
Yeah.
And so we call this the Press On Powerball effect. So our $4 million of our donors' money, we have leveraged into $87 million worth of research by bringing in and partnering with other organizations. And so, somebody's $5 is like part of that $87 million now.
I constantly, there are principles of leadership, but part of it is to rally people around something that makes them feel that's a cause that's larger than themselves.
Yes.
You guys have done that. Part of it's establishing common ground issues. Everybody everywhere has had their lives impacted by cancer in some way.
Yes.
Whether it's a loved one, it's a friend, it's just everybody has had to deal with the effects of cancer in some way. And I will tell you, so here in Augusta, oftentimes we're portrayed as being politically divided. But when I was in office, I always looked at things and I saw how the community rallied around your family. I'm like, that's the community that I live in.
Yes.
And it wasn't just that one cause. I saw our community rally around so many causes, but the good is out there if you look for it.
Yes.
And I think sometimes we feed the darkness, and we ought to be doing what you guys are doing and feeding the light.
Well, it's interesting. One thing you just said, the one takeaway, one of my major takeaways from Brennan's experience is that people are good.
Yes.
You just have to give them a chance and maybe a direction, in order to pull that good out and an opportunity to contribute. And I think that's what leadership is. I
agree completely. And I think a danger that we face is when people in leadership positions get into silos.
Yes.
And Melissa and I were in Miami a couple of weeks back, and we met so many great people, but I'm like, I just like dropping myself into places and being anonymous and meeting your average man or woman on the street from all walks of life. And I would say that shows me, it encourages me and inspires me about humanity, because there is more good out there than there's bad. I know that. I see it. But I think if people get stuck in a bubble and you're just watching one network or the other, and that's your existence, or you're on the internet, and that's the primary space that you inhabit, the world might not look that good. But if you're out there interacting with people, or you're going to Memphis and you're seeing the good in the people that work at St. Jude's, and you're seeing the good's out there, but I think sometimes you've got to put yourself at intersection points with it.
You do. So there is this one exercise that I did back in 2009 when Brennan was undergoing his first bone marrow transplant, and it speaks to what you're talking about. So I feel this is my spiritual obligation to see that it's on me to look for the good in someone else, right?
Agree.
Like, that is my responsibility. It's not their responsibility to show me their best side. It's my responsibility to see them in their wholeness, in their highest capacity. So I did this exercise, and I wrote about it in a blog way back then. And again, it was an act of survival and of necessity for myself. But I said, just go through your day and make eye contact with people. And you can drive your car and someone can be at the intersection, right? You can just look at them, but look at them through the eyes of dropping any ounce of the story you think that they have, right? All of those stories that we might think this person represents, but just see them as a human being that just is love at the very end of the day, that they just are simply a human being. It will transform your day if you can do that. And then you begin to start to do that in other places, right? It's just a little quick exercise. It's just like, there might be some people that are hard to think that way about, but you're training yourself just to drop all of that story that you have, that it's hard to think of this person in this way.
Yeah, because I think it's just easier to put people in a box sometimes. And I'm like, nobody I know lives in a box.
Nobody does.
I mean, everybody, we're all complex people, and we're conundrums wrapped within riddles, and that's okay. I think different is good.
Well, and there's a really good reason why it's easier to put them in the box, because it takes calories to think outside the box.
Yeah, but doesn't everybody want to lose weight these days?
So a good weight loss method is to think outside of the box.
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. Thinking outside the box will help you drop those extra pounds during the holidays. Well, Tara, I want to ask you as we sort of start to wrap it up here. So what gives you the most fulfillment in your life and makes you happy? I mean, makes you the happiest. And it's, it can be chocolate cake. I know it's not just chocolate cake, but I'm like, I think there is too much darkness out there. And so what puts you in your happy place?
I put me in my happy place.
That is a really good answer.
Is that a good answer for a coach? I think that what I have learned in my life, and this came in my mid-30s, I was in a very unhappy place with all of the outside trappings of someone who should be happy.
Yep.
Marriage, children, great legal career, the house, the whatever. But inside there was an emptiness that I had, and what I learned was I knew how to achieve outside success. And I was looking to that outside success to make me happy.
Yep.
And it's limited in its ability to do that. That is an inside job. So then you go about the work of doing that interior work. And when you do that, you always have access to that skill set of, oh, yeah, I'm the one who gets to decide in this moment how I want to feel. And it might be happy, but it might be sad, it might be whatever. But I do know that's my responsibility to touch that place inside me. And the great thing that does, it relieves all your other relationships from having to do that work for you.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm like, they are unburdened by needing to make me happy. I'm unburdened, and we're all able just to be there for each other, because we're already there for ourselves.
Well, Tara, where can our listeners find you?
Absolutely. They can find me on the interwebs, Tara Simkins. The inner tube. Tara Simkins, TaraSimkins.com. There's no P in Simkins.
Yes.
And so that's my website that tells you about my coaching, my one-on-one, and then my group coaching. You can also follow me on social media at Soul Shine Labs on Instagram, SOULSHINLABS.
Perfect. Well, I almost feel like after our counseling session that you've counseled me so much that you need to send me a bill for this one.
Oh, no, I haven't counseled you at all.
No, but Tara, it is always a pleasure being with you, and I hope that you'll come back. Much love to Turner and the boys.
Thank you. And you and Melissa and the dogs.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's all the time we got. Dropping the mic, and we are out.